Hey everyone, this is FIDE Master Kostya Kavutskiy here for Chess.com, and today I wanted to show you guys a really interesting endgame position. So before we talk about anything, I want you guys to pause the video and try to find the best move for white, or the strongest continuation. Okay, so if you want more time trying to figure out what's best for white to play, then keep those videos paused and keep thinking. Otherwise, we're just going to move on. Here, although black is technically up a pawn, it is this doubled pawn on e7, which is more or less insignificant. And what is more important to note about the position is that white's pieces are much more active. This knight is attacking this bishop, this rook is controlling the f-file, and this knight is pressuring the e6 pawn. Because of this strong activity, white definitely has a clear edge, which means that there are a number of good moves here for white. Right, it's very hard to spoil a position like this because all of white's pieces are good and all of black's pieces are passive. That said, there was definitely one move that is without doubt the strongest move in this position. So a good move that a lot of you were probably considering is rook d1. And the point of this move is that white is threatening rook takes d8, followed by knight takes e6 check, forking the king on g7 and the rook that shows up on d8. There's really only one way to deal with this threat. Black has to move the knight, so knight c6. And if knight takes e6 check here, this looks appealing at first, but after king f7, we take the bishop, they take our knight. Black has more or less solved all of their problems because their king and knight are now in good positions and the rook is going to come out next. And material is equal and all of black's pieces are suddenly getting into the game. So that's not really what white wants. A much stronger move would have been something like rook d7, activating the rook along the 7th rank where it can start attacking all of black's pawns. And in this position, white definitely has a clear advantage. However, that was not the best that white can do. And in order to find the strongest move here, you really had to dig deep and ask yourself, what exactly was black trying to do? And this is a very useful question that you should often ask yourself during your games, maybe even on every move. If you can figure out what your opponent wants to do, then a lot of times you can stop it and thus make their position worse while making your position better. And here, if we ask ourselves, what is black going to do, then it's very easy to come up with the strongest move for white, and I'll show you what I mean right now. So black's pieces here are really passive, and obviously black should try and look for a way to untangle. Now, the king can't move because then we could take the bishop on h6. The knight is also stuck on d8 defending the e6 pawn, because if white takes this pawn on e6, black will be in check, and then the rook is cutting the king along the f-file, which means we would just win the game immediately. And finally, this rook is on h8, and if it tries to go to the active f8 square, we can simply trade rooks, and then again, black's bishop on h6 is lost. So that leaves black's bishop. It only has one reasonable move, which is bishop g5, and once it goes there, black can play bishop f6, and then start getting some of his pieces out since the bishop isn't hanging in every line. So once we realize that black's only proactive move here is bishop g5, then the best move for white is kind of obvious. It's just h4. We take away this square from black's bishop, and suddenly black has no good moves. The knight can't move because we'll take on e6, the king can't move, the bishop can't move, and the rook can only go to this dumb g8 square, where it does just as much as it does on h8, which is nothing. So this simple move h4, and suddenly black is in complete Zugzwang. They can't move any of their pieces without losing this bishop on h6. By the way, even this move rook g8 is a tactical mistake, because after rook d1, we're threatening to take the knight on d8, and then knight takes e6, forking the king and the rook. So knight c6, take on e6 with check, king f7, and now knight takes h6, check. And in the other line, this rook was on h8, and black can simply take the knight on e6 and have a good position. But here, because the rook is hanging on g8, white is simply winning the game immediately. And believe it or not, but being in Zugzwang with several pieces still on the board means that you're in serious trouble. So how does white win the game from here? After all of our pieces are being used to restrict black's pieces. Well, except for one, the king. So all white has to do here is move the rook up to f3 and then transfer the king over to the queen side where it can go after black's pawns. Black's pieces can't move at all to stop our plan, which means that black is totally helpless to prevent white from achieving this. And although it's hard to get at black's pawns with our king right now because they're all the way back on the 7th rank, the thing is that black has to make moves. And unless they want to just give up this bishop on h6, they have to start pushing some of these pawns forward, which means that these pawns will quickly become easy targets for the king. For example, they can play e5, rook f2, e4, king f1, a5, and here white can do something like a4, fixing this pawn, and the king is going to come to b5 and take this pawn. Or just wait around. I mean, eventually black is going to run out of pawn moves and will have to move one of his pieces, after which white will simply win. Right? If this knight moves, we always have knight e6 check and knight takes h6 mate. So eventually black is going to run out of pawn moves and will have to move a piece and will lose the game. So I thought that was a very interesting endgame position because you won't often come across a pure example of Zugzwang like this one with so many pieces left on the board. Usually Zugzwang happens in like king and pawn endgames or positions with very few pieces left on the board. But it's a good reminder that a lot of times the best strategy is to try and restrict the movement of your enemy's pieces as much as possible. And this can often be just as good as actually being up materials, that when your opponent's pieces can't move, they can't contribute to the game, and it's like you're playing with extra pieces on the board anyway. Thanks a lot for listening, and I'll see you around on Chess.com.